If you haven't watched the video I made before this one that reviews the basics of spell rotations, you might actually find that helpful. In this video, you'll learn how to make a good rotation, like where you start and how to go about figuring out the best way to min-max a rotation. So a common question I see when people want to make a rotation is, where do I start? So I actually take a step back, not worry about the mechanics of a simulator or how to use it, and instead just say out loud what I want the rotation to do. I found that if you can't describe what you want it to do, it will be really hard to make a rotation. So for an outlaw rogue, I would say I want to use energy to generate combo points, and then I want to use those combo points. And I want to make sure that I use my big cooldowns as often as possible and at the right times. Now that I have at least a super basic place to start for a rotation, I'm ready to make a rotation in the simulator. I can either start from scratch or I can edit one that I already like. So for now, let's try editing a spell rotation. As you may already know, you need to make a copy of a spell rotation first, assuming it isn't one you created in the first place, and that it's in read-only mode. So I'm going to click on this rotation from the report, click copy, give it a code name, which has to be unique, and then we're ready to edit. Now I want to preface this next part when we get into editing the rotation with the fact that I have never played a rogue. I'm sure some of the things I'm going to try to do in the rotation will be bad ideas. I'll probably miss some nuances. And if you notice any of these things, please just smile and nod and hang out to learn how to make a rotation better. So once everything's set up, the first thing I like to do is a trick I actually picked up from Swole, our theory crafter, who's been setting a lot of this stuff up. So he suggested that I start with a basic rotation, or in this case, a rotation that already exists, and then simulate it. And then I can use that report to see if it's doing what I'd expect. So I like to think of it like I'm reviewing somebody's combat log and giving them advice. Whatever advice I would give them in like a form or whatever is what I should change in the rotation. So let's do that real quick. I'm selecting my Zoop's Rogue demo rotation, and then expanding the More Options section to make sure I select the report output first, which runs as many iterations as I need to hit a small margin of error. And that gives me consistent results. Since the report option gives me very consistent results, it's good for checking on things like how many spells were used and their average damage and crit rate, and it's also good for checking buff uptimes. So I'm putting on my pretend rogue expert hat for the day, and I'm going to see if the spells are being used as often as I'd expect. So Saber Slash is a main filler spell, because I'm an expert, I know that. And so it's good that the number of uses is high, otherwise that'd be an indicator that I did something wrong. Now let's move on to buffs. Each class usually has a few buffs that should have really high uptimes. In this case, Roll the Bones should have a high uptime, and it does, so we're probably doing that right. This other section is quite handy as well, as it shows how much power and alternate power I generated, how much was used, and how much was wasted. So we see here that Saber Slash gave me most of my combo points, but about 15% was wasted. I want to see if I can maybe fix that. I also feel like I should get more damage from my finishers, but remember, I just have a fake little pretend rogue hat on today. But let's go back to the rotation and see what we can maybe change. Now I said that I think maybe I should do more damage with my finishers, and I want to waste less combo points, but I only want to try to change one thing at a time so I can see what effect it has. If I were to change two things at the same time, I might not know which one ended up causing the increase or decrease. Now when we're looking at Saber Slash, which wasted 15% of my combo points, I see that it's already the last thing in my priority list, so it's not like I'm prioritizing it too high. And if we look at that spell, we see that it has a chance to strike a second time. So maybe I'm at my max combo points when this is triggering a lot. Alright, so let's change the condition on the finisher to execute when I have 4 or more combo points instead of 5 or more, and that'll get me to use my finishers more often. Now let's just rerun this simulation and see if I'm right. So we can see the DPS up here, and let's compare that to the one that we previously ran before I made this change. Alright, well you can see the first version is higher. And that's a bigger difference than the margin of error, so let's call the new setup a loss. The original one was better, even though it was wasting more combo points. Out of curiosity though, let's see if it affected those wasted combo points. Alright, so I see that it totally did reduce. Then I'm only wasting 5% instead of almost 15%, but since the DPS isn't higher, let's put that finisher condition back to where it was. Now if you know your class well, you probably have a lot more things to change and you would fiddle with this a lot. But I'm going to move on so I can show you another useful tool for analyzing rotations. So let's run a simulation with the log output selected instead of the report output. Now remember, the log output only does one single simulation instead of a few hundred or a few thousand. So the damage swings will be really high in this log output since we're only doing one. And you can't look at the damage output of a single simulation to determine if the rotation is good or bad. Because remember, the standard deviation number from the regular report was around 18,000, I believe, for outlaw rogues. And that tells us that any single simulation could swing much higher or much lower. And some of them are even twice as high or twice as low. But the log report is very useful for checking out specific actions, but not for comparing DPS. So let's take a look at one of these log outputs. Now it's my understanding, because I'm a rogue expert today, that Curse of the Dreadblades is a pretty big buff. So I want to see what spells were used during that buff to make sure that the rotation is set up correctly. To do that, I filter for Curse of the Dreadblades down here, and then I see when the buff started and ended. So let's filter by that time range. And then I'm going to remove this Curse of the Dreadblades down here so that everything shows up that was in that time range. And I can see the spells that were used here and determine if the right things were in fact used. If not, I can adjust my rotation. Since I'm clearly a rogue expert today, I'm going to say all of this looks great and we're good to go. But let's say there's a small chance it's not perfect. Don't be afraid to use the good old guess and test method. So you can move this thing around, changing up conditions and so on, moving priorities up and down. And ideally you would just change one thing at a time, remember that, and then run a simulation and just keep repeating this process. Now, don't feel silly if you end up doing this. I'm going to let you in on a little secret. Theory crafters do this guess and test method all the time. It's one of the ways they min-max everything so well. So before you know it, you're going to be an expert too. Now, if you go and try to make some rotations, but you find that you actually need some help, maybe you stumble on something, or you thought you understood something, but it turns out you just need someone to point you in the right direction, drop by our Discord channel or our forums. We're here to help, we're very friendly, and there's just 3 of us, so it's a project we've put a lot of work into, and we're honestly just really, really excited that you're here playing with it, and we hope that you have a lot of fun with it and find it useful. So if you do need some help, just drop on by.